Hey, before I get into the story of Lazarus, I wanted to address the Congressional Assembly at the beginning of this year, a day or two ago, where they ended a prayer with "Amen" and "a woman." The word "Amen" doesn't even relate to gender anything. Amen essentially means this is true. Just because some word has men in it doesn't mean that it's anti-woman. And typically, and if you're think and if I'm if you're assuming that you're praying to God about that, I will let you know that my Lord Christ edified women. And if you were going to write a mythology back in his time, in a culture that at its best didn't really give any consideration to a woman's testimony, and at worst was just straight up misogynistic, if you were going to write a mythology during that time, would you have written women being the first ones to see him in his resurrected body, like Mary Magdalene? I wish this virus would die. It's just a scapegoat, honestly. I never really considered now all this stuff was even related to safety precautions, especially with stuff that's been done towards the church. I honestly believe that you're just using this virus as a scapegoat, and I wish that the scapegoat would die, just so the illusion would be broken. But I wanted to talk about the character of Christ tonight, and I'm preaching to myself as well, because I have been emotionally all over the place for a very, very long time, and I need this too. So I wanted to talk about the seventh sign of John, which was raising Lazarus from the dead. Now a man named was sick, Lazarus from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair. And it was her brother Lazarus who was sick. So his sister sent a message to him. "Lord, the one you love is sick." Funny enough, the name Lazarus means "God is my help," and Lazarus was a Hellenized Greek form of the Hebrew name Eleazar. And Mary and Martha, at this point of knowing Jesus, they didn't specifically ask him to come and heal Lazarus. They didn't feel like they needed to, that it was simply enough to tell Jesus what the problem was. And I think that could, for Christians, could say a little bit mentally about what expectations that we should have. It's because, especially, even though Christ loves us, it doesn't separate us from the common necessities and the physical and mental weaknesses of life. And I can attest to this. Men of God are still men. We still have these. We still have the bodies that we have, and those bodies are capable of feeling stressed out mentally, physically, emotionally, and I'm learning day by day that he never promised that this was easy, and if anyone says it is, they're just trying to sell you something. When Jesus heard it, he said, "This sickness will not end in death, but is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Jesus loved Martha, her sister, and Lazarus. And that's profound, because he loves all three of them individually. It points all three of them out individually, and they all have different temperaments and personalities. Martha, the busybody, Mary with her past and her love and devotion, and then Lazarus is a friend of Jesus, but he loved each of them. So when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Then after that, he said to his disciples, "Let's go to Judea again." "Rabbi," the disciples told him, "just now the Jews tried to stone you, and you're going back there again?" So basically, before all this, people tried to stone him. Some Jewish people tried to stone him because of his claim to be God, which he is. "Aren't there 12 hours in a day?" Jesus answered. "If anyone walks during the day, he doesn't stumble because he sees the light of this world. If anyone walks during the night, he does stumble because the light is not in him." And he is aware that there's a limited amount of time in the day. There's 12 hours, well, technically 24, but 12 hours of like day. And it'll be sunset and nightfall before you know it. So we need to get done what God has sent us here to do, which I admit has definitely been more difficult, trying to figure out avenues right now to do that with. He said this, and he told them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm on my way to wake him up." Then the disciples said to him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will get well." Jesus, however, was speaking about his death, but they thought he was speaking about natural sleep. So Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus has died. I'm glad for you I wasn't there so that you may believe, but let's go to him." Then Thomas, called Twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let's go so that we may die with him." And Thomas, although famous for his doubt, he is the pessimistic one of the disciples, and his pessimism was correct. When they went back to Judea, eventually that did result in the death of Jesus. He was correct about that, but even at that, he was willing to follow it. Even at that point, he was willing to follow him into it. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, and the reason that Jesus waited to go to Lazarus, first of all, after 4 days, a body will start to decompose, and when it starts to decompose, it starts to stink. So at day number 4, you can expect the stink. And also back then, there was a Jewish superstition that said a soul stayed near the grave for 3 days, and at day 4, there was no hope of resuscitation of the body. And he's about to go raise this man from the dead, despite their belief, or despite the fact that he is starting to decay. Many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them about their brother. As soon as Martha heard that Jesus was coming, She went to meet him, but Mary remained seated in the house. And I can sympathize with Mary not wanting to really go anywhere and just sit there and ponder during a time of grief. I understand that perfectly. Then Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother wouldn't have died. Yet even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Your brother will rise again," Jesus told her. Martha said, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even if he dies, will live. Everyone who lives and believes in me will never die, ever. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe you are the Messiah, the Son of God who has come into the world." And she said that she would still trust him despite this disappointment. And you got a whole chapter of the Bible, not a whole chapter, but a whole book of the Bible dedicated to that sentiment with Job. And it has definitely been a struggle. I've experienced myself disappointment and frustration after frustration after frustration. But I still remember things that the Lord has done. Because I remember one time reading Jeremiah, and as in comparison, he was talking about a place called Ephraim, and Ephraim was a name for Israel, and at that time Israel had been split in two. The northern half was still called Israel. The southern part, where Jerusalem was, is called Judea. And talked about Ephraim remembering the sins of his past and striking his knee in grief, and God saying, even though I spoke hard things about Ephraim, I still care deeply for him, and I will have compassion on him. And I just remember something inside of me that I never felt more loved after I read that. And it's those kinds of things that I try to remember to deal with the feeling of the rug constantly getting swept out from under me lately. Having said this, she went back and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." As soon as she heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. The Jews who were with her in the house consoling her saw that Mary got up quickly and went out, so they followed her there, supposing she was going to the tomb to cry there. And when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and told him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her crying, and the Jews who had come with her crying, he was angry. He was angry in his spirit and deeply moved. "Where have you put him?" he asked. "Lord," they told him, "come and see." Jesus wept. It's to me now unbelievable how much power just that two-word sentence has. He knows he's going to raise him from the dead, but he wept. So many things that indicates he was truly a man. He was fully God, but also fully man. He was acquainted with grief, and Christ was not ashamed of his humanity. He identifies with others in their sorrow, He loves people. He has perfect humanity, and humanity unadulterated is generous and sympathetic. And in this, he dignified the tears of other people in the Bible who wept, and all who did weep. This is a God who dignifies humanity. I'm not talking about sin, I'm talking about humanity. He made us to be able to feel emotions. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But there were some of them who said, Couldn't he who opened the blind man's eyes have also kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, angry in himself again, came to the tomb. And he was angry at the havoc brought upon by the evil one, and felt the tenderness for the mourners. He was angry at all the suffering that death causes. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. "Remove the stone," Jesus said. Martha, the dead man's sister, told him, "Lord, he already stinks. It's been 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they removed the stone. Then Jesus raised his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you heard me. I know that you always hear me, but because of the crowd standing here, I said this so that they may believe that you sent me." After he said this, he shouted with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out bound hand and foot with linen strips and with his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to him, "Loose him and let him go." And during all this, Jesus, he could have moved that stone himself just by saying the word, but he wants believers to participate in his work, and it's a privilege to do so. We're just man. But yet he created us in his image. And he, for whatever reason, wants his followers he wants people to participate in what he has planned. Which is, once again, another reason why I'm frustrated, because I feel tired of feeling like I'm shut in all the time. And I am ready for all this to be over and then go make some waves. But who knows? Maybe I can make waves doing this. Maybe this is how I strike back at the virus and the times that we're living in. Therefore, many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he did believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees convened with the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the governing Jewish body, which included Pharisees and the Sadducees. And the difference was that the Sadducees did not believe that there was a resurrection from the dead, while the Pharisees did. And they said, "What are we going to do since this man does many signs? If we let him continue in this way, everyone will believe in him. Then the Romans will come and remove both our place and our nation." So this miracle, raising Lazarus from the dead, that was essentially the miracle that was the breaking point for the authorities, where this is where they decided that they were going to kill him. This is the point where there was no going back. And they were afraid that more people would follow Jesus, which would lead to the Romans regarding it as a threat. And they didn't want to lose their prestige and power, because Romans did not like a crowd. They were under the assumption that any time a sizable crowd assembled together, it was a possible attempt to overthrow the Roman government. The Romans were, let's just say, the Pharisees were not the only paranoid authorities around there. If we let him continue in this way, everyone will believe in him. Then the Romans will come and remove both our place and our nation. And our place is mostly believed to refer to the temple that was there at the time. They had made an idol out of the temple. And funny enough, the rejection of Jesus ended up resulting in the political ruin and the ultimate destruction of that nation. Because in AD 70, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the temple after a series of attacks by Jewish assassins against Rome, and they had had enough, and they literally tore it down until there wasn't a single brick left. And after that, Israel was not a nation again until 1948. One of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all. You're not considering that it is to your advantage that one man should die for the people rather than the whole nation perish." He did not say this on his own, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus was going to die for the nation, and not for the nation only, but also to unite the scattered children of God. So he wasn't intending to, but he ended up prophesying what was going to happen, which is going to be the redemption of man. And back to that whole Israel not existing again until 1948. Even though the nation of Israel ended up rejecting Jesus in favor of Barabbas, who was an insurrectionist, God still cares about Israel. Heck, Jesus was ethnically Jewish. His followers were Jewish. And I say this because I saw some really forceful breaking up of synagogue meetings in New York City earlier this year. If I'm remembering correctly, fire hoses being used. And I will just say this to the upcoming administration: be very careful on how you deal with Israel. The British, before World War II, they had the opportunity to create a free Jewish state and didn't do it. They no longer have an empire. And everyone knows how cruel Germany was. And for 45 years, the nation was literally divided by a wall. And for 45 years, families were separated from each other. And the further east you go in Germany these days, because the wall that divided Western and Eastern Germany and Berlin, West Germany had more Western world influence, while Eastern Germany was part of the Soviet bloc, which enforced a an atheistic ideology. Everyone says religion is the reason for all the world's problems, but there have been some very evil secular governments that have existed too. The Soviets had an enforced state atheism, and even without the wall, you go to the further east you go in Germany, the more blatantly secular it gets. So I urge you to be very, 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 very careful on how you handle Israeli and Jewish affairs. But this is my hope, that the character of Christ, the person that he is, because he said, if you have seen me, you have seen God the Father. He is the perfect representation and reflection of God's character. And I hope especially the part of he wept, because a lot of tears on my end have been shed this past year. God bless, and I hope you have a good night.